Okay, good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, if that's a more relevant introduction for you. Thank you very much to all of you for registering for and attending our webinar this afternoon around marketing and AI, game changing or too much hype. So leading our webinar today and taking us through this really kind of fascinating and relevant subject will be Andrew Stephen. Andrew is Saïd Business School's Associate Dean of Research, also the L'Oreal Professor of Marketing here, and Director of the Oxford Future of Marketing Initiative. So very shortly, I'll pass over to Andrew, who will start talking us through today's subject. But very briefly before we do that, just a few hygiene factors to help us get the most out of our hour together. We will talk for about kind of 45 minutes all told. If you have any questions that you'd like us to answer or Andrew to answer around the subject we're discussing today, please do pop them into the chat box. We will then address those and pose them to Andrew towards the end of our webinar session today so that he can address as many of those as possible. So without further ado, I will pass over to Professor Andrew Stephen.
Hello, everyone, and good afternoon here from Oxford, or whatever time of the day it is, wherever you are in the world. Thanks for joining us for this chat this afternoon about AI in the context of marketing. And as you can see, the title is "Game Changing or Too Much Hype," and so we want to kind of get into thinking about where is there value here versus where is it just a lot of hype and perhaps a little bit overblown, maybe for now, but maybe it's going to be not overblown in the future. And so we're going to look at this from a few perspectives, and I'm going to walk through some thoughts that I have and that the team here at Oxford Saïd has coming from our research and our engagement with industry. And I'll do that, and then I'll certainly leave plenty of time for Q&A at the end. So as you heard from Andy, please use the chat box, put your questions in there. We'll be keeping an eye on them throughout the webinar, and we'll answer as many as we can in the back end of the presentation. So if we kind of get into the session, first of all, what's AI? So this is a term that we see all the time now, and I'll show you some stats around sort of the popularity of the term in a moment, but it actually pays to get a little bit definitional before we go too far. So artificial intelligence, if we look it up in the dictionary, which is perhaps as good a place as any, we're looking at basically computer systems that are seemingly able to do things that normally require human intelligence. And so this definition from the Oxford English Dictionary, of course, gives a couple of examples like visual perception, speech recognition, translation, but also things like decision making. And I think once we start to go into the world of how does this fit into marketing and how we manage our marketing processes and marketing operations, customer relationships, and so on, it's important to remember that we're looking at where computer systems, basically software and hardware, can help us out with human intelligence type tasks. Not necessary to replace them. I'm sure this will be a question that might come up later in terms of is AI basically going to put us all out of jobs? That's not the perspective that I'm going to be offering on this webinar. It's more about how these systems, these tools, these sort of advanced software and hardware systems can sit alongside and complement what humans are doing, particularly in the context of the sort of work that we do when we think about marketing. So I think that's sort of reasonable to set the scene. This is a popular topic. Probably preaching to the choir. You're attending the webinar about AI and marketing, so you probably know that AI is a hot topic. But if we just look at some Google Trends, for instance, just to give us a flavor here, we can see this has really taken off in the last couple of years, sort of the midpoint on this slide, where we start going from sort of a flat line of Google search interest and it starts trending upwards, almost at a 45-degree angle. That's all categories, all types of web searches worldwide, but that's kind of the last 2 years where we see that point of inflection. If we just look at Google searches about AI around the world within the category of advertising and marketing on Google, you see the same pattern. Perhaps a little bit even more pronounced in terms of an upwards trend in the last couple of years, but it's really taking off. And I think whenever anything is really taking off, there's always a great risk of hype. And just thinking about what are we going to use this thing for? Well, I don't know, but let's just dive in. Let's throw some money at it. Let's throw some people at it and see what happens. So there's a role for experimentation, and I think that's healthy. But there's also a need to be smart about how you experiment, test, and learn, and then turn it into something that is sort of a more stable part of your operations. And that's really the perspective that I'm coming from in this talk. So, there's a hype cycle. I'm sure some of you have seen what Gartner puts out. Is sort of put this into to kind of complement what we see in the Google search trends around this topic. But this breaks within the context of digital marketing advertising, breaks sort of trends or the items on the hype cycle down into lots of different things. And if you just sort of, not going to go through every dot on the curve, but there's a lot of these that have AI aspects to them. So if we think about real-time marketing, if we just pick the first one, that yellow triangle there on the left-hand side, to pull that off, you need some form of machine learning or artificial intelligence. The next one is artificial intelligence for marketing. Personification or things around personalization also is going to need some advanced analytics, for instance, that are going to fuel those systems which could have an AI type component. Likewise for programmatic TV advertising and so on as you traverse that curve. So even once we break things down in marketing to sort of the things we're getting excited about or perhaps worried about or experimenting with or investing in, there's likely to be an AI related aspect to it. So it's kind of everywhere. It's pretty pervasive. So it's not about do we do AI or not? Actually, it's about what type of AI do we do? What are the applications and where are we going to get value from that? And that's what I want to talk about now so that we can go from this, well, AI is awesome or maybe scary or maybe going to change the world, and this sort of very generalized, very high level perspective into something that's more grounded, something more practical. And when we try and do that, at least our perspective here is to put it in terms of value creation. Where is whatever it is we're doing, and we'll talk about some examples in a moment, where is it adding value to our business, to our customers, to other stakeholders? How is it adding value? What sorts of value are we talking about? Is it straight up commercial value? It improves the ROI we get, or it gets us a sales lift, or things like that, or are they maybe harder to measure, but other sources of value creation, perhaps around deepening customer relationships or improving the retention rate that you might have with your customers, or improving the value of a brand or enhancing the reputation of an organization in the world, and so on and so forth. So this is not a webinar about value in business. It's a whole other topic, but it's important and core to what we talk about a lot in our programs here. But the point is we need to see applications of AI and AI related technologies in marketing through this lens of value creation. How is it helping us basically do a better job in one way or another? And you've got to be very crystal clear about that specification, because otherwise it's just hype. It might be exciting to some, but it's not going to help drive your business growth and perhaps positively disrupt what you're doing in your business and grow it at a better rate than it otherwise would. So that's sort of the sermon, I suppose, on value versus hype. It's a really, really important point to preface everything with. So with that said, what I wanted to share with you is a framework that we've put together for thinking about application areas of AI and marketing. And this is perhaps not exhaustive. It's intended to be fairly general, and we'll go through each of these 4 boxes with examples in a moment. But the idea is to put some structure on things, to start to think about, okay, where can we use this stuff? Where could value creation come from? And so I think about it in terms of 4 categories. There's applications within digital advertising, applications within a pretty broad category, actually, if you will, of automation and personalization. There's advanced analytics, another massive, massive field that isn't just in marketing, but is certainly dealing with a lot of challenges in marketing. And then customer experiences or digitized components of customer experiences. I think there's a lot of scope there as well. So we're going to talk through these, going to give you some examples. And again, it's not to be exhaustive, but to really give you some ideas, some thoughts, maybe spark some new thinking as well. But all in the spirit of trying to be a bit more organized here, a little bit more structured when we think about applications of AI in this very, very big field of marketing. So let's dive into digital ads first. So Google and Facebook, they control a very large amount of the digital advertising market. They're called the duopoly for that reason. But if you think about their platforms, their advertising platforms, so obviously their sort of consumer-facing or user-facing platforms are doing all sorts of things, be it a sort of a newsfeed on Facebook or on other properties they have like Instagram and WhatsApp, or search on Google or all the other things that Google offers. But if we think about it from a marketer's perspective, from an advertising standpoint, these are very, very sophisticated AI-driven advertising platforms. So let's take Facebook as an example. And I'm sure many of you run advertising campaigns on Facebook all the time. It's a very, very sophisticated ad platform. Why is that, and where does AI come into the picture? Well, let's suppose I'm an advertiser. I want to try and drive traffic to my new website, to sort of get people there, and then I can generate some leads, for instance. So I can run ads on Facebook and Instagram. That's great. I can go there, I tell it my objective, and then I will select a whole bunch of options. For instance, I'll pick my audiences. Now, with Facebook being what it is in terms of having a lot of data on its users, as I'm sure many of you know, you can get quite specific in terms of the types of audiences you wish to target. So I can specify all of that, set my budget, set my timeframes, put in my copy, upload my ad and images or videos, and off I go. Then the magic happens. Now, what's behind that is essentially an artificial intelligence based mechanism that's doing lots of things. So there's an auction there in terms of determining the price you pay and so on and so forth. But the thing I want to focus on there is the matching that it's doing. Because what they're trying to do is deliver on the objective that you set. So if I said my objective is to drive traffic to my website, what does that require therefore from a user? It requires a user to click on a link and go to an off Facebook page. It's a simple objective. You could have many more complicated objectives. So Facebook knows of its users who are more likely to do that under certain conditions. And then I've said, I want the audience to have, X number of characteristics. It might be 20 different features that they, have to have, and not just sort of basic demographics, but interests and geographic regions and all sorts of things. And so then this AI is really solving a complex matching problem very, very quickly. All subject to optimization around constraints set by the pricing auction or how much I'm going to pay. But that aside, so it's trying to get people who fit the description of whomever I'm wanting to target, my audience specification, who are also likely to do what it is I need them to do to achieve my objective. And doing this at scale, en masse, in real time, in sort of split seconds. That's AI at scale from a digital advertising standpoint. And what Google does in AdWords, for instance, is in many respects a very similar thing, except with search and also using AI to recommend keywords and those sorts of things to make the marketer's job a bit easier. So you've got a lot of advanced software, software engineering machinery going on there, which really is sort of artificial intelligence. No human can do that complex matching task. It's obviously just at a scale that's unimaginable, and the speed required is also unimaginable. So we see this day in, day out. So whether you're advertising on these platforms, and these are just two examples, they're the big ones, or you're a consumer being targeted with ads, you're part of this AI machinery in digital advertising, this programmatic advertising AI, no matter what. That's just sort of how that digital economy, or that part of the digital economy, works. So we see that, and I think the advances that we're keeping an eye on for the future in this space are probably twofold. One is what's coming. So in terms of what's coming next, one is I guess incremental improvements to these algorithms. So they're learning algorithms, they're always getting better. The goal for them is to deliver on advertisers' objectives while maintaining a good user experience. So making those algorithms better, constantly trying to improve there is sort of a constant, if you will, in terms of what's going on in the future. The other thing is, I think, different formats, different approaches. The other thing that we have to be worried about in these contexts is things around, or concerns rather, around brand safety. So this might be a concern that some of you have with respect to, the classic example is, your ad shows up against inappropriate user-generated content on YouTube, for instance, or against hate speech on a Facebook news feed, or those sorts of things. So AI is being used on these platforms to clean them up, to try and screen out inappropriate content so it doesn't get into the eyes of users, first and foremost, but also doesn't get to ever be adjacent to any of your advertising content or owned media content as sort of branded content. So there's a lot of work going into that type of AI, which is involving things like computer vision, natural language processing, topic identification, lots of machine learning techniques that are essentially trying to weed out the bad stuff as soon as it gets added to the platform so it never sees the light of day. But to my point earlier about see AI as a complement to human work, Facebook also has, as an example, teams of humans who will look at content that gets flagged either by users or by AI systems to ascertain whether it is in breach of the community guidelines or sort of the terms of what's acceptable content. So again, you've got this combination of human and non-human, but that's also a big part of the digital advertising system at the moment. So that's what I'll say about digital advertising. We could go on forever about all the different uses of AI, machine learning, advanced analytics in digital advertising, but really this is where it's very sophisticated already in sort of marketing practice, and it's only getting more sophisticated. So let me move on to the next box in our framework, automation and personalization. So lots of examples here, and I think automation and personalization for that matter, these are not new things of concern to many marketing practitioners. Anyone who's been doing email marketing, for example, for a long time, decades even, has been, even back then, used maybe more rudimentary forms of personalization and automation, but a lot of the innovation came from that space, sort of from the electronic direct mail context. But let me talk through a few examples specifically that are a bit more recent. So one of the things of personalization that Google, for instance, talks about is this notion of a segment of one, where that bullseye in the target is that one perfect customer that you have to reach through, be it email, social media, or mobile messaging, or whatever it might be. But this notion that we can now use technology, and in this case, versions of artificial intelligence, to really enable us to be able to do that marketing to one, or that sort of hyper personalization of content. So it's doable. What I'd say though is, and it's doable at scale, what I'd say is beware of over personalizing. A bit of an aside, but it's an important point, an important theme to keep in mind is just because we could use a system, a software system, and some AI to do that personalization at scale and kind of narrow down our segments to be super hyper targeted, doesn't mean we should. And there's this ongoing debate, as I'm sure many of you are well aware of, between mass reach advertising versus personalization or precision targeted advertising, just to use advertising as an example. That's a valid debate. Sometimes you need a billboard that just kind of reaches everyone. Other times you do want to get very, very precise and laser laser targeted. So the tools are there to help you do that laser targeting. Doesn't mean you should always do them. It comes back to objectives. What are you trying to achieve? Do you need sort of a mass reach so you get that volume because your product or service is kind of for everyone, or for fairly broad segments, or do you need to get extremely precise? It also depends on kind of what stage customers would be in their journey. So where the value add is going to be is going to be inextricably linked to what your objectives are. So the key lesson in thinking about just because we can do it with AI doesn't mean we should. And so it's a good example of kind of having a little bit of a pause in a decision process just to be sure that there is a need. Another example that I think is an interesting one is chatbots. So I'm sure we are all engaging with chatbots from time to time. Maybe you don't even realize it if they're that good. Probably they're not that good. So chatbots are there. Chatbots are a growing area of sort of use or digital touch points, if you will, in customer journeys in a lot of different sectors. Obviously, sort of service sectors are where we're seeing a lot of use of chatbots, but also the big tech players have chatbot related solutions, either in market now or on the way. So whether we like it or not, chatbots are something we have to deal with. So that allows you to be personalized. You can have the chatbot have that conversation, but it automates it and does it at scale. So again, it's this use of AI, which is this combination of, in this case, of some text analysis normally, if you're typing, to figure out what the person is saying and coming up with a response. And so we know the technology's there, it can be done, but whether it leads to a positive customer outcome, a satisfied customer at the end of the day, or a customer that comes back, or problems being solved versus not being solved is something you need to keep an eye on. Again, it's a question of looking at what you're trying to achieve and making sure that you're getting value out of it, as opposed to just putting the tool before anything else. So keeping in mind those goals and objectives. Third example on this one that I thought I'd share, because often we don't think about it, is trend identification. And so in some industries, it's really, really important to identify, say, emerging product trends. So you can imagine in say, fashion, that might be something, but definitely in, say, consumer goods, fast-moving consumer goods, this happens a lot. Beauty, healthcare, and lots of food, for instance. Lots of different sectors care about identifying trends because you want to bring products to market as quickly as possible, new products to market as quickly as possible that the market is going to want, and you would rather be in there more at the ground floor than coming in as the fifth version of I don't know, quinoa flavored Greek yogurt. That sounds like a horrible mashup of food trends, but you get the idea. Trend identification is hard. So historically, it's been done by gurus, really, sort of people who are experts in certain areas or certain industries, and they kind of keep abreast of those trends, and then they essentially sell their expertise as consultants on to the companies who want to pay for it. Again, not a problem with that, but what we're now seeing is using AI, looking at basically a needle in the haystack type problem, trying to find small little upticks of interest in things like social listening data, so mentions of things, or more increasingly, photos of things. So that requires some computer vision, not just natural language processing, on, say, social data, be it text or images or video. Looking at search trends, so Google data, for instance, and other sorts of things, but basically applying pattern recognition at a large scale to find those needles in a haystack, things that are not at all detectable to the humans, so to speak, yet, but are just kind of creeping up, or there are enough signals to suggest that maybe some humans need to take a look at it. So trend identification is actually a really interesting application of various types of machine learning and artificial intelligence, but really it gets pulled together when you think about pattern recognition to find those needles in a haystack. But importantly, at least in my experience, talking to companies when they do this, they're using this as almost an early warning system. So then it gets fed on to brand teams, product teams, whoever the relevant people are in the organization. It's not complete automation of, identify a trend and then, off it goes to the factory. The robots make it, the drones deliver it, and no human touches the process. So there's definitely a need for us humans in that process, but it can be useful at the beginning. To identify some things that might have otherwise been missed through more conventional or traditional means. So that's automation and personalization. A lot of innovation going on in that space, and these are just a few little examples that I thought I'd share. Another one I want to talk about, and this is a big one, is advanced analytics. So there's lots of analytics in marketing. Marketing, has always had quite a strong data-driven culture, at least in parts of marketing. I'm thinking of things like customer relationship management, where CRM databases have been sort of a big part of marketing activity. Certainly in the sort of the customer insights, quantitative research world, it's always been data-driven, but we're now at this point where the advanced analytics tools are just amazingly powerful, and they can really help us address some fundamental questions in marketing. And so I think a few examples that I'll share with you, kind of get to that. So the first kind of set are, I'm sure to many of you, things that you hear about, you talk about, you do. You have vendors pitching you on, perhaps, but things like marketing or media mix modeling, so MMMs, and then multi-touch attribution modeling or data-driven multi-touch attribution modeling, MTA, or just attribution. These are very important because these help you figure out, the ROI of a media spend, for instance, in a MMM context. It's help you figure out, which parts of a complex multi-touch customer journey are more or less responsible for the ultimate goal in terms of, let's say, sales conversion or some other form of customer acquisition. So these are critical. If we want to be data-driven marketers, we need to know what's working and what's not working, and put some numbers on it in terms of where we're spending our money. And certainly CMOs and non-marketers on boards and in the C-suite are asking these questions of marketers and their agencies. And so interestingly, econometric modeling, which this is coming out of, hasn't changed a ton in the last decade or so. There's definitely been advances, don't get me wrong, but I think we're really at the moment seeing a leap forward through the use of advanced analytics and sort of machine learning models, which is a sort of a subset of AI applied to these fundamental types of questions. So I think that's an area to watch. It's also an area where there's quite a lot of hype, so watch it, but be careful. But I think there's a lot of innovation in sort of marketing science that is now able to be done because we have the computing power and the tools at our disposal. So that's one thing. Another thing I kind of think is related to that is complex customer journey analysis. So I think this is really important if you sort of want that 360-degree view of the customer and really want to understand it. So it goes hand in hand with attribution modeling. But I think that is now more possible because we can sort of use AI to imagine all the different possible things or sequences or paths that customers could take, and then compare that to the data, and then try and identify what what characteristics of those journeys or those paths are important. Where are the bottlenecks? What seems to lead to more conversions, and then what interventions could marketers take to sort of nudge people down one path or another? That can be a much more data-driven set of decisions. Then the last one here, just broadly, and I've sort of mentioned it in passing already, for a few of the others is computer vision and natural language processing. So here, this is where advanced analytics is bringing in a lot of what we call unstructured data. So it used to be, for instance, if I take the top of that slide, media mix modeling, if I take the sort of the traditional approach to that, we might know, okay, well, our sales this month were, whatever for this product, and then we know how much we spent on all our various advertising channels, and maybe how much we spent on some events or some PR or whatever. But we sort of have our buckets of spend, our budget allocation, and then we know what the outcome was, and we can essentially see how these things are correlated. It's more complex than that, but that's the idea. What's missing from that is all these other things that could have been in front of consumers' eyes that we didn't necessarily directly spend money on. And the problem with that is we used to never be able to measure it. Now things like word of mouth, social media, things that happen in those spaces, we can measure. We could do social listening, for instance. But the problem there is it's very unstructured data. So it's text, for instance. It's a tweets. Or it's images that people post on Instagram that maybe have your product in them. It's unstructured. It's not zeros and ones or numbers that sit nicely in a spreadsheet type data frame. So that's where we need machine learning tools for computer vision and natural language processing to process the images and videos, because a video is just a lot of images, and to process the text, that's natural language processing, and turn it into data that can be passed through advanced analytics, statistical models, basically. And so this is sort of the engine room, if you will, from a machine learning standpoint that's driving a lot of the advances here, because we're able to add more variables, we're able to find more potentially relevant data sources and throw them into the hopper and see what actually becomes relevant. So we can discover a lot more. We can learn a lot more about our customers, for example, because we can see what they're doing on social media, or they can share information with us. But we can process that from natural unstructured data into something that's meaningfully analyzed by advanced analytics. So I think there's a lot going on in this space. Certainly much more than we can talk about, in a few minutes in this part of the webinar. But it's also something that gives, I guess, non-technical marketers quite a lot of headaches, because you don't know what's real or not. You don't know necessarily which vendor has the best solution, or which approach to take, or just how to go about the business. So I think there's a need for all marketers to be more familiar with these sorts of things, and a bit more savvy around advanced analytics, even though you may not be doing the advanced analytics, but at least being able to go below the surface level so that you're a bit more savvy around what's going on in that space. All right, so moving to the fourth and final category in this little framework of application areas, and it's not a small one, but I'll just give you a few examples to bring it to life. Is digitized customer experiences. And so, I think of a customer experience not as necessarily just these transactions, but as a sort of a whole set of engagements that customers could have with the company, and with other customers and other people too. But not just people, they can also have it with technology. And so adding digital components, digital touch points, if you will, into a set of customer experiences is something that we're all doing. And we've been doing this for some time, but a lot of these are now, I guess, AI enabled, or have AI components to them. Perhaps the most topical one, or at least the one that's been talked about a lot throughout this year, really, is the introduction of voice, or at least voice becoming a much more mainstream thing. So of course there's an Amazon Echo device. Alexa lives in these devices, and the Echo was the #1 selling item on Amazon last Christmas. I don't know what's going to be the #1 selling item at Amazon this Christmas, but I'm sure if they have their way, it's going to be more Alexa-powered devices. Probably not the Alexa-powered microwave, but you know, they're throwing Alexa into everything as our third-party manufacturers into, you know, TVs and fridges and washing machines and you name it, your car even. So voice as an interface is what's really going on there. And of course, this is enabled by AI, but it's not a solution to anything. It's just another way that we can interact with technology. And so I think there are interesting and important questions being asked currently by marketers around what to do about voice. You know, if people search on voice, does that change the way that they search? Does it change the way they make decisions? Then if they were typing things out on a you know, a phone or a tablet or a laptop, um, and so on and so forth. So I think really the key there is to recognize, obviously there's AI behind it, but think about use cases. Where is it going to add value to you and your customers before you necessarily say my business needs an Alexa skill or whatever the equivalent is on Google Home and so on and so forth. But you know, this use of voice as an interface isn't going to go away. Would be my prediction. So having a think about it if you haven't already done so, and developing a bit of a game plan, I think is important, certainly as we're sort of towards the end of 2018 and thinking into 2019 and what's coming ahead. I think being prepared is important, but don't jump too fast, I would say. Make sure your customers actually see value in that interface. The next thing I think is interesting with sort of AI-powered digital components of customer experiences is things like virtual reality. And I sort of, there's a picture of, you know, someone wearing VR goggles, but you know, you can think of VR. AR is actually something I'll talk about next. But these sorts of things are again customer experience possibilities, and I emphasize possibilities. Do you need VR? Maybe, maybe not. But it is a shiny new toy, and it's something well, not that new actually, but surprisingly still seen that way. That again, you want to have a think about and decide. You know, do you jump in? Do you not jump in? Do you sit on the sidelines and wait a little bit, then jump in? For what purpose? How will you know it's valuable, and so on and so forth. So again, we could talk at length about that, but just to kind of flag it as there's lots of these sorts of things that have AI components behind them that could go into customer experiences or part of a customer journey, but don't necessarily have to right now. So it's about asking the tough questions and not jumping too soon as a bit of a way to make sure you are driving growth in the right direction. And then I alluded to this, AR, I think is another sort of technology where we see a lot of AI and machine learning and sort of, you know, deep learning neural networks being used. And the example I have here is there's this company called Modiface. So Modiface is a company that earlier this year was acquired by L'Oreal. So L'Oreal, being the largest beauty company on the planet, acquired a AR, you know, basically an AR, artificial intelligence software company, which is kind of unusual. Normally they acquire beauty brands. Why did they do that? Because they want to allow people to virtually try on makeup products, perhaps hair coloring products as well in mobile apps. They think this is part of the sort of the customer experience in an online shopping, you know, e-commerce type environment. And so L'Oreal has been doing this quite a lot for a number of years. They started out actually with an app called Makeup Genius, which allowed you to try on makeup from the L'Oreal Paris brand. Now with Modiface, they've sort of incorporated that into a lot of their brands. NYX is one mentioned on that slide. You know, just embedded in the user experience on an online you know, web browser or a mobile browser or app. So it's really seamless. So if I'm looking for, you know, a shade of lipstick, I can just try it on using the front-facing camera on my phone. Really easy to use technology for the consumer. A lot of AI behind that in terms of bringing it to life and making it work, making it realistic, making it actually a great value-adding customer experience. And I think L'Oreal and Motifacer is a great case study of how that's worked well. There are plenty of case studies out there of how it's not worked well, but this is one that I think has been quite effective. So I think there's always new technologies. Don't put the cart before the horse. Think about adding value, probably starting with the customer, but thinking about these sort of AI-enabled or AI-related, AI-powered technologies. It's an exciting time to be a marketer and think about digitized customer experiences. So that's our little framework, and just a bunch of examples really. What I want to do to wrap up, and then we'll have some time for questions, is to bring it back down to earth and ask this question: how do we make it happen? How do you think about your organization, your team, even yourself as a marketing professional on your own? How do you think about taking these sorts of ideas around various applications of AI to marketing and make it happen? How do you implement? So I think the simple rule here, and I'll elaborate on it, but the starting point is get back to basics. And I've sort of said this in lots of different ways already, starting with what I said at the beginning around value versus hype. And I think value considerations and using that as a guiding light, as your sort of North Star, is a very big component about getting back to basics. But to elaborate first, and I've got a few things here. First up, AI is a means to an end. It's nothing more than that. It's nothing less than that. It's essentially a set of tools, and it's actually a bucket load of tools. So AI is not one thing. We're not at general AI. We're not sort of sentient beings that are merged with machines, and you can't tell the difference. We're not there yet. What we read in science fiction may be closer than some of us would perhaps like, but that's not where we are, and certainly not where we are in marketing. So AI is a set of tools, and they can be very, very valuable tools, but you need to get back to basics and think about how to use those tools and what they're going to do for you. So what are those tools being used for? And with that in mind, the second point here is I think AI in marketing is best seen as a set of tools for answering questions, solving problems, and then hopefully in doing so unlocking value. So this notion of the back to basics, AI is a means to an end, not an end in and of itself. Really, it's about solving problems or answering questions, if you want to see it that way, which also implies that you need to have a pretty good definition of what those questions are or what the problems are that need to be solved and why you need to solve them. And then to unlock value, you need to be able to articulate what is the type of value that you're trying to unlock here. So something I touched on at the beginning, but really want to reinforce here. You have to know what the problem specification is, before you build something to solve it. And sometimes in marketing, I think we, particularly with digital marketing, where technology is involved, we forget about that. But I before I was a marketing academic, I was actually a civil engineer, and which sounds like an odd combination, but bear with me. But back then, simple thing: you want to build a building, you need plans first. You need to know what the problem is that you're solving before you design and build a solution. Same thing applies to us in marketing, and I think we forget that far too often. And then third, and the last thing I'll say to this back to basics is a combination of human and artificial intelligence, HI/AI, I think is really what we need. Automation's great, but automation without checking what's going on is a recipe for disaster. We can't automate everything. We can't just sort of let the systems decide for us. We're already letting that happen. So back to my example about digital advertising on Facebook, for instance, the AI systems there are deciding who actually will see your ads. You're not hand picking those individuals. You're giving a set of parameters, and the system is then optimizing within that set. That's a good example of HI/AI. there's human inputs, there's human oversight, so you look at the data afterwards, see what happened. But there is a place for the automation, the AI to take over, because you just need it to. It's not possible otherwise. So I think finding those complementary uses, those combinations, is what marketers need to think of. And that's where you therefore get away from this future of work type debate around, well, are we all going to be done out of jobs because the robots will take over? Well, maybe in some areas, but not necessarily. And I think as long as your customers are humans, and marketing to machines is a whole other topic, but as long as your customers are humans, marketers need to have a human aspect at many points along that process, and obviously have human oversight. So I think that combination is key, and that's also true to this principle of getting back to basics. So quickly mention a few things, and I'll leave this this slide up as we do Q&A. Because a lot of the things that we've talked about are related to a number of the executive education programs that we have here at Oxford Saïd that I am involved in. And so, there's plenty of information on our website. I'm not going to do a sales pitch, and have audience drop off right away. But I just wanted to, if the sorts of things that we're talking about here on this webinar are interesting and relevant to you, then I certainly would encourage you to take a look at this portfolio of programs that we offer, which are a combination of summer on-campus programs, either here in Oxford, or our digital marketing analytics is also offered in Melbourne, Australia, or our digital marketing disruptive strategy program is a fully online program that might be interesting to you as well. So lots of options to sort of think about technology with respect to marketing, analytics, growth, disruptive strategy. And you certainly can reach out to us for more information. But with that, I'd now like to use the 10 or so minutes we have left to take a look at some of the questions that were posed during my little monologue, so that we can see what some of the thoughts you had might have been. So we just bear with us for 1 second while we're pulling up the questions from the chat box, and then we'll dive into it. Okay, it looks like our AI has failed us. We're just looking for our questions here, but for some reason the GoToWebinar has has wiped our questions. So if anyone, feel free. Oh, here we go. We've brought it up now. All right, so let me just start with one. Since we sort of started with advertising, I'll do one about advertising and actually tracking. So so the question is my computer being tracked by advertisers all the time? I try to keep my life private where I can, and yet from Google searches, I see adverts come up a week later for items I search for. I find that an intrusion of privacy. So I guess the simple answer is yes, your computer is being tracked. There are ways to go off the grid using VPNs and these sorts of things, but we're not going to go into that now. Yeah, there is tracking, of what you're doing, and this is how a lot of ad targeting is done. And actually, sort of interesting, two different approaches. So that in sort of a Google world or a keyword-based or an interests-based targeting world, that's exactly what you see. Because if you looked at a certain website, I don't know, if you looked at a pair of I don't know, a T-shirt on a retailer's website, didn't buy it. Now according to them, you might be interested, and so they might want to do retargeting a week later to see if they could convince you to convert the sale. So that's sort of, you've indicated maybe some intention. They want to kind of probe that and see. On the other hand, if it's targeting you based on your characteristics, which is something that happens maybe more in a Facebook type environment, then it's different. But the sort of logic of those companies is that, well, you've provided that data in one way or another. I think what we're going to see, and we are already seeing, is people saying, well, actually, you know what, I didn't mean to give it to you for that reason. And so I think there's a healthy backlash and healthy questioning out there in society at the moment about how far is too far when it comes to tracking and using that for advertising purposes. So I think watch that space. Another question. This one is about trends. So the question is, many trends often last for short periods of time. Can AI quickly pick up on these trends and inform relevant parties with analyzed data before these trends subside, or are replaced by other trends? Great question. I mean, I think it depends on how short is a short period of time. But it comes back to I think in this case the business objective. So let's suppose it's a context of I'm trying to identify a trend because I want to go to market with a product that taps into that trend. It's going to be sort of obviously a trendy product. How long is it going to take you to get that product to market through your supply chain and distribution network? How long do you need that product to be on market and sell so that you get a return out of that? There's sort of business model questions I think that come into it. But I think yes, picking up trends quickly is possible. It's harder to pick up on trends which are going to be more persistent than others. And I think that's often what companies are trying to do. But the way a lot of these systems end up getting trained is if you're wanting to look for a trend that might last, is they'll go back and look at previous trends and essentially train a model to try and identify which characteristics seem to be good predictors of persistent versus fleeting trends. And then they'll just keep on running that model to identify with some probability how persistent a trend will be. So it's entirely possible. It just depends how you set up that system. But I think back to basics, think about the business model and how you want to use that information first. Another question. So this one is actually, I think, an important one, and it's about access to AI. So how does a mid-sized SME, so let's say about 50 to 100 employees, 10 to 20 million turnover, start to engage with AI? Is this just for big budget marketing teams at the moment, or is this something that's accessible to all? Answer is yes and no. So I think the digital advertising examples I used, those platforms, Facebook and Google, for instance, the self-service advertising offerings that they have are there for SMEs more than anything else. I mean, they're there for anyone who wants to pay them money, but with a small budget, you can get to work on you can get advertising to work pretty well on those platforms. So therein lies one way to kind of leverage AI in that way. I think where it's maybe not quite as democratized is, say, in the advanced analytics space. And it's not necessarily because the software to do advanced analytics is insanely expensive. It's often actually the people who are qualified, the data scientists, to do the advanced analytics work are insanely expensive in terms of salaries. So sometimes that becomes a problem. Although I think that's changing. Advanced analytics is getting democratized. Some people in who are sort of data science experts would argue that's kind of a bad thing because the tools are being put into the hands of the people who don't know how to use them. But that's, I think, a separate set of issues. But I think coming back to sort of the broader point about accessibility, it's really about thinking about what would the use case be, and then seeing if you could dive in, or even just sort of strategically dabble is a term I like to use, to dip your toes in and get some experience, because actually a lot of this is more about people getting experience and skills and capabilities than it is about the software investment, for instance, or the computing power that you need. Okay, another question. You mentioned digitized customer experiences. What is your view on AI and customer engagement? What comes first? Well, I think it's again, depending on the use case, but maybe the chatbot example I used is a good one here. So what you tend to see in chatbot practice, I guess we can call it that, is actually a hybrid approach. So, maybe it's the AI coming first to kind of figure out what the problem is. So let's put this in a concrete example. Let's suppose I got a problem with my mobile phone operator, and I go into their app, and I need a billing issue resolved. So maybe the AI is useful for kind of triage, figuring out what the problem really is, and then deciding who, as a human inside that organization, is best qualified to field that request, and then it gets siphoned off. And so I think when we think about those processes, thinking about where does the AI come in, where do the humans come in, where do they kind of come together, when are they in sequence? I think they're actually the questions to think about. So just as we've always done, say, service process design, we sort of think about blueprinting a service. I think thinking about where the AI comes in and doesn't come in is now part of that practice as well. So we'll do a couple more questions. All right, so to best use AI in a software company, who needs to be involved, basically? So what team members need to be involved? Are we talking about data scientists? Are we talking about CTOs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Great question, because it comes back to the people side of things. And the more research I do in this space, the more companies I talk to in this space, the more case studies that we develop, the more and more we realize that it all boils down to people. Perhaps ironically that we talk about software robots essentially, but we're talking about people at the end of the day. I think in terms of the structure of the organization, everyone that was mentioned in that question could play a role. What's interesting is the person who posed the question didn't say marketers. I think when we talk about AI and marketing or customer experiences, customer management, as well as retail, service, these sorts of contexts, the marketer has to be front and center in those considerations and definitely have a seat at the table. How to bring things to life, though, is then going to be a collaborative effort. So if it's about advanced analytics, you're going to need data scientists, you're going to need people who can translate that into I guess business speak or marketing speak, but the marketers are going to need to work hand in hand with those sorts of people. So, really good actually example of this integration of skills comes from a tweet I actually saw the other day from a friend of ours here at Oxford, Stéphane Berube, who's the Chief Marketing Officer of Western Europe for L'Oréal. And so he was giving a speech, I think, in Paris, where basically he was talking about digital transformation of their businesses and digital transformation of marketing and the capabilities they need to have, and basically said, marketers need to be data savvy, marketers need to be data fluent. That doesn't mean we need a world of marketers who are also essentially second-rate data scientists. We need great data scientists to work hand in hand with marketing, but the marketers need to be in the driver's seat. But they also need support from, we're seeing chief digital officers come up a lot. We've just released some research last week on chief digital officers that is on our website if you want to take a look at that. These people lead digital transformation, but at the end of the day, from a marketing standpoint, it's the marketers, the CMOs, and everyone else running brands who need to take the lead and then bring the technology in as they need it. And so I think we'll do one more question just to wrap it up in the last couple of minutes. So let's go for sorry, just finding a good one to end on. So I think a question that I've seen here from a few people actually is what should an experienced marketer do to essentially get up to speed on this sort of stuff, and short of putting the hard sell on you and saying come and do our programs, I think but there is something about education and sort of lifelong learning that's important there. But I also think it's about realizing that you can't know everything and do everything. So it's about surrounding yourself within your organizations and just broadly in a professional network, with a diverse set of people who know more about this than you do. And you can learn from them, but you have other things to bring to the table through your experience or expertise, your marketing wisdom, if you will. That's important as well. So I think this is not where we want to see a generation gap emerge. I don't think that's what would be healthy at all in marketing, or sort of an experience or knowledge gap. But I think people at different career stages or different backgrounds need to identify where those gaps are in their knowledge, and find ways to sort of plug those gaps. But realizing that you can't be a specialist in everything, and so therefore networks and teams are going to be the way forward. So, that's all I was going to say. I'm going to hand it back over to Andy, who's going to wrap up the webinar. But just for me, I want to say thank you for spending some time with us today. Hopefully this was interesting and thought-provoking, and hopefully not the first time that you'll engage with us here at Oxford. Saïd, over to you, Andy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew, and I'll echo Andrew's thoughts there. Thank you to everybody who joined us today. I again hope it's been a kind of really interesting and insightful conversation to be part of, and one we'd love to continue to have with you, should any of the opportunities to engage with us that Andrew's mentioned today are of interest. So if you drop onto our website, you'll find several of those opportunities, all the way through from engaging with some of the latest research. Andrew mentioned our CDO report that was published last week, through to coming and joining us in Oxford and spending a couple of days with us to deep dive into these things, get access to people like Andrew, another real key faculty who are doing some fantastic work in this area, in a wonderful business school. So we really hope to kind of engage with you further past this webinar. We'll be in touch with everybody who registered today, just to make sure you get a recording of the webinar, to introduce ourselves a bit more formally, and hopefully to open a conversation with you that we can continue. So it just leaves me to say thank you again. A good day or evening or morning to all of you, and we hope to see you soon.